Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm is touring the country touting the Biden administration's investments in infrastructure for clean energy. The president's Inflation Reduction Act set aside billions of dollars in tax credits and incentives to accelerate the transition. But nearly 2 years on, the U.S. remains well behind its goal of reaching a net zero economy by 2050. I asked the secretary what she sees as the biggest gaps in the clean energy supply chain as she pushes to reduce U.S. reliance on China for critical minerals and technology.
I'm in a construction site right now that is with Group 14, who are building an anode factory with silicon for batteries for electric vehicles. China, as you noted, they control about 90% of the supply chain for batteries for electric vehicles and critical minerals. What this company is doing, and this is with help from the bipartisan infrastructure law, thanks to the president's Invest in America agenda, they are producing anodes for batteries that don't have graphite. Graphite is one of the critical minerals that China has had export controls on that we can't even access. So this is one example. There are 500 manufacturing facilities that have announced they are coming or expanding in the United States as a result of the president's Invest in America agenda, just on the clean energy side. So it is super important that we have identified the gaps in the supply chains. We are funding responses to those gaps, meaning inviting investment for the private sector to come and fill those gaps. It is really exciting because these factories are growing up in every pocket of America. And here in Moses Lake, Washington, this is one of those pockets.
You've certainly taken sort of a two-track approach here. One of it is about the transition to clean energy. It's also about bringing more manufacturing back to the U.S. You certainly have companies out there that are competing in this space who say, look, it is great to really focus on countries of origin, making sure that the components are for friendly countries, but at the same time, they're going up against competition from China where they are competing at a much lower cost. How does the administration support some of these companies as they say, look, we want to be a part of this transition, but we don't know if we can compete at this cost?
Yeah, that's exactly why the president's agenda was so well thought through. First is the bipartisan infrastructure law gives grants, and this particular facility that I'm in right now got a $100 million grant from the bipartisan infrastructure law. But in addition to that, the Inflation Reduction Act also provides tax credits for manufacturing these components in the United States. What that does is bring down or starts to level the playing field from the other countries who are also providing incentives for their companies to stay there. So we're in a battle. We have not been in this battle before as a country, meaning we haven't had the federal government partner with the private sector before in the way that it is doing now to level the playing field and make America really the irresistible nation to invest in for this clean energy revolution. This global market for clean energy products is going to be about $23 trillion. And these products can be made anywhere. But what the president has said is we want them made in the United States. And that's why this public-private partnerships happening all across the country, fueled by the Invest in America agenda, is so important.
The adoption of EVs, of course, a critical part of this transition to a green future. Last year, we're coming off of record numbers of new EVs sold, but we're starting to see increasing caution from drivers who are saying, I'm not sure I want to take the leap, considering, number one, the cost, and then the lack of infrastructure that's in place. The administration has said you want 50% of new cars sold in the U.S. to be EVs by 2030. When you consider the rate of growth right now, can you still meet those targets?
Yeah, we can. I mean, the EVs are really growing very fast. I mean, it was double last year what it was the year before. We're projecting that same kind of uptake this year. But here's what the administration is doing to address the two concerns that you raised. One is there are tax credits for electric vehicles made in the United States for buyers. So you can get a $7,500 tax credit off at the dealership if the car is made in the United States. You can also get a $4,000 tax credit at the dealer if you buy a used car. So that's an important thing to reduce the price up front. There's a lot of new models that are coming on from our domestic manufacturers that are much lower price as well. But in addition, we want to make sure that people don't have what is known as range anxiety, that they can find a place to charge no matter where they are. First of all, a lot of people don't even realize that you can plug in an electric vehicle in your garage if you have a garage, but not everybody has a garage. And you can charge it up that way. And it is so much cheaper to operate an electric vehicle, meaning that you don't have to fill it up at the gas tank. It saves you hundreds of dollars every month, depending on how quickly you fill up. But we want to put charging stations everywhere. And so that's why under the bipartisan infrastructure law, again, part of the president's agenda, there was a $7.5 billion investment to put charging stations all across America. 500,000 charging stations are starting to pop up. All the money has gone out to the states. They are starting to install those charging stations. We're putting them every 50 miles along transportation corridors, and we're putting them in rural areas and in places where the private sector has not put in those charging stations to fill in the gaps. So you're going to start to see a lot of that construction happening this year as well. And the charging stations we're seeing are made in America now too. So all of that is feeding on one another, and we're trying to do as much as we can to address all of those concerns at once.
Finally, let me ask you about the LNG export pause here. I know you've gotten a lot of pushback on the back of the announcement. You've said that, look, this does not undermine confidence in U.S. LNG. I wonder, as you think about how to evaluate these individual projects, how has that evaluation process shifted as a result of the impact of climate change? Does that factor in bigger now that we're looking at what the fallout is?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and this is why the pause is simply to do a study to assess one of the reasons is to assess the question that you just asked. What is the impact of demand for fossil fuel energy globally when all of these countries, for example, have said that they are going to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels, and more countries are doing that and have enacted policies to do that? What is the impact on our national security? Meaning, we want to supply our allies with natural gas, and we are doing that. And this pause doesn't affect any of those authorizations. But into the future, shouldn't we be looking at where the global trends are going and what our allies need? And also, what is the impact on greenhouse gas emissions overall? And importantly, what's the impact on prices at home? If we are exporting, half of our natural gas, which is the amount we've authorized, what does that do for prices for those who use natural gas at home? Those are the kinds of things that we are looking at: the economics, the national security, the climate impacts, the impacts on the people who live in the surrounding these liquefied natural gas terminals, as well, is something we are looking at. All of that data is being taken into account by our national labs, and so they're doing a modeling evaluation based upon those factors, and that's required under the Natural Gas Act. We are not allowed to approve terminals unless it is in the public interest. And so we have to evaluate, what does that mean to be in the public interest? And that's exactly what we're looking at.
The president's senior advisor, Amos Hochstein, was recently quoted saying he thinks the pause will take anywhere from 10 to 14 months. Is that the timeline you're looking at right now?
I know it will take some months. We haven't said that exactly, but it's the national labs that will be doing that, and they've got a whole array of modeling capabilities. It doesn't happen overnight, but it will take some months to do it.
And that was Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. Our thanks to her for joining us from Moses Lake, Washington.